we're going to talk about neighborhood coaching today. And that is a model that we're using at PNC that we're really proud of and really happy about. And before we dive into it, just want to say that this is very much in process for us. So we wanted to come here today to talk to the group about it, to share kind of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. But I would just say we don't have it all figured out yet. And you know, I think many of us have been to conferences where people will do presentations, even at this one, and it's sort of like, we've nailed it, right? We've got it. So now we're here at the conference to share it with you because we've got it all figured out. We're a little bit still in the middle of it. And so we thought it was important to share the process with everyone. And so I would just sort of set us up that way. Keep that in mind as we go through it, that we're very much in the midst of this. And we still thought it was important to get out here and to share with the group, despite not having it tied up neatly with a bow. Okay, so that said, I think to understand where we are with neighborhood coaching, you have to have a little bit of background. So before we can get into the present and the future, let's kind of go back in time to how we started and how we got here. All right, so our program in the digital space started small. We had a couple folks on board who were trying to answer questions. Big questions for a big organization, but it was a small group of us, right? And we were trying to figure out how we could get a large number of people and a large number of teams that were covering a large experience up to snuff on accessibility. And so in the early days, we were exploring sort of mass training options. We were exploring, of course, doing a lot of assessments, right? And we had big clunky reports that we were handing people. And we were starting to feel like this mass approach was maybe not giving our people at our organization what they needed. We had people who we were getting more answers than questions from our early approaches around mass training and mass assessments. And so what I've got on the screen here in terms of how it started, we, as I mentioned, started small. We had great ideas about what. We really had to figure out the how. And as we started to dig into that, we needed to get grounded with tools. And so that was when our relationship with DQ started, right? We were interested in some of the tools that they were providing. We were interested in some of the professional services that we were providing. So early days, we got the tools in and we got some subject matter experts from DQ to help us carve out how to use the tools, how to get the teams up to snuff, and how we were really going to work out accessibility at PNC. So that's the beginning, right? It was from the ground up and then some. And so going to the next slide here, which brings us a little bit into the earlier days or maybe the middle, right? We'll take a look at what we carved out, right? So we talked about the tools, we talked about training, but we talked about that mass training wasn't working for us. And so I'll take you just a touch ahead to talk about training, because I think that makes sense for us. Because this is, again, the early groundwork, right? So early groundwork wise, we got into roles-based training. The feedback that we were getting was when we take business systems analysts who write our stories in our agile process, when we take them through fundamentals training and we take them through sort of generic training, they return to their day jobs unsure of what to do. And this was happening across the board. So we decided to carve out a path for roles-based training, right? Where, again, whatever you were doing in the agile software development lifecycle, we were going to bring together your day job with accessibility. So in the beginning, roles-based training was big, and it's been a really important part of our role, right? Get people trained on their day jobs. Something that has emerged over the last year or so is also some additional needs around ad hoc training, or we call it special topics training. So as we were getting feedback, as people were getting equipped with, here's accessibility, here's how I bring it into my day job, we realized that when they brought the training and they brought the skills into their day job, people across different parts of the program were coming up with similar problems. So we started to do some ad hoc training on common problems. So that is training, right? So early days, we had to kind of crack the training nut. We needed to make it roles based, make it relatable, and then spin up some sessions based on specific feedback from specific folks. So, if you have your cap on for how this has come together, we needed to get training. We needed to get crisp on training for our people and our purposes. Okay. And so the other thing that we needed to get crisp on, and this is the purpose of today, because we're going to talk about coaching and neighborhood coaching, was how we bring in the expertise. And so what I've got on the screen here in terms of talent is just, we realized that talent was the heart and soul of our program. We needed to get subject matter experts on board who were well-versed in WCAG. And we needed to get experts in the web space, in the mobile space, and in the PDF or document space. And so what emerged, and this is what I talked to the XCon audience last year, but don't want to leave you behind if you weren't here, was accessibility coaching, right? We, when we had teams equipped with the tools and we had teams equipped with the training, there was still a missing piece for us. And that was the expertise, again, like at the ground level in with the Agile teams. And so that's where coaching was born. And so on this page, I've got a reference to subject matter experts and I've got a reference to accessibility coaching. And in our past, we really needed to kind of get that sorted out. And where we went with the help of Dylan Barrow from DQ's book was in the direction of accessibility coaching, right? At a big organization, you've got subject matter experts on everything. And those subject matter experts kind of dip in and dip out according to the subject that they are experts on. And we wanted to create something that was a little bit more grounded and a little bit more that kind of took on a different flavor. And so again, we started to read about coaching, we started to think about coaching, and we started to pilot coaching. So we had a couple DQ subject matter experts who we thought could execute on the coaching model well, and that's what started to come together. So let's talk more about what an accessibility coach is. We talked sort of high level, right? They're more than a subject matter expert. They're an actual coach. And I think last year, when we talked about coaching, I had said, all right, close your eyes, think about a coach from your past. If you were involved in a sport or, even drama club, there's coaches, maybe think about a coach from your past, or maybe you're passionate about a sports team. Think about the coach who sort of brings about good feelings from you, right? Because coaching is sort of brings that about in people. And we wanted it to be more than the subject matter expertise, right? So this slide is going to dig in for you a little bit about coaching. So my first bullet here, right? The first pillar of coaching: teach, mentor, and enable members of an Agile team with digital accessibility best practices. Second bullet here: integrate with and dedicated to an Agile team. And so again, when we think about teaching, when we think about mentoring, when we think about coaching, it's not just providing the subject matter expertise, it's bringing each member of the team along with you on it, and helping them understand their role. Because if you understand accessibility and you understand your role and you understand how you have to apply it, then day to day, as you're in your ceremonies, you can bring these concepts with you. And another thing that we ask our coaches to do is to get everyone grounded in the terminology. So to really empower them, right? The feedback that we were getting is people were like, I know about accessibility and I think I know what to do, but my confidence isn't there, right? And so again, that's why we wanted to put people and coaches right there with them along for the ride day to day. And then more tactically, and we'll talk more about this as we go on, right? The coaches can also contribute at the design level, right? I'm sure there's been a lot of conversation at XCon about shifting left, right? But this is where it lives for us. If our coaches are involved with the designers from the get-go, we're sort of checking that box, right? And getting folks up to snuff from a design perspective. It starts at design, and then again, it goes right through the software development lifecycle with trained folks along the way. But the accessibility coach to say, hey, a business systems analyst who's writing this story, I think this acceptance criteria actually fits here. Let's not forget about that one. Right. So if they're right there with them day to day, we were getting ahead of a lot of questions before they were even raised because the coach was right there to sort of support it. And we'll talk a little bit more about some other supports. And I just sort of mentioned the last bullet here, right? That the coach is there to ensure that the accessibility acceptance criteria makes it into stories and bugs sort of properly. So that's accessibility coaching. The coaches are wearing a lot of hats and they're along for the ride sort of intensely for quite a while. And that's kind of where we left off last year. We were saying, this is the model, this is coaching, this is how it's working for us right now. But we knew that we would be evolving a little bit. And so this slide on my screen, I think I've hit on a little bit. We talked about BSAs and designers, but the same would go for how developers interact with the coach, right? The coach is actually helping them in the early days with the code and making sure that their day-to-day is accounted for. Same thing with QAs and QEs, right? The folks that are actually doing the testing. In the early days, the coaches are saying, here's how I would test this story. You can shadow me and watch how I test it. And we'll do that for a couple weeks. And then when the time is right, it'll be the other way around. The QA will go in and test the story for accessibility, and the coach will shadow them so that they understand that they are absorbing the information and gaining some degree of independence. So what I've got on this slide, again, sort of addressed throughout, is each member of the team has a role to play. Each member of the team has interaction with the coach, from the product owner right on through the QAs and QEs. So again, current state on coaching, or that's sort of where we left off. Where we've come in the last year is that we've got some teams to a level of maturity where they're ready to graduate our program. And so that is big. And so that is where this is a fork in the road from what we've talked about in the past to what we're going to talk about today, because we have teams who now, after generally 12 to 18 months. I know that might raise a lot of questions, and I'm happy to take them at the end, but the model that we were working with is you'd have an accessibility coach for 12 to 18 months. And over those 12 to 18 months, they are working through a list of milestones to ensure that teams are gaining a certain degree of maturity, and that within the roles, we'll have situations where, hey, the BSAs have met their milestones and they are doing everything that they need to do for accessibility, but the QAs are being pulled in different directions. And so maybe they're a little bit slower to come along on their milestones, right? So I think we dove in previously on milestones, but we use that to sort of say, how mature are these teams today? Where are they going in terms of maturity? Are we measuring their success properly? We use the milestones to do that. And so again, on the screen, mentioned that we've got, generally 12 to 18 month engagements, and we look at graduation around that time, according to how teams are meeting milestones. And then the coaches are also there to make sure that the behaviors are there, right? So there's tangibles, there's the milestones that you can meet. But are the crews talking about accessibility? Are the crews thinking about accessibility? Are they bringing it into their planning exercises? Are they bringing it into their priority or their prioritization conversations, right? So that's another thing where the coaches are really gauging that and trying to make sure that before we graduate a team, they're talking the talk as much as they're walking the walk, if you will. And that goes into, that they're demonstrating that independence. And so along the way, lots of feedback, lots of tweaks, lots of little changes, some big changes, right, to get teams to a degree of maturity where we can actually graduate them. So when we start to talk about graduation with teams, and this was an early lesson learned, even though throughout we are saying it's going to be 12 to 18 months, we're not, the company, our digital team is not planning to keep coaches embedded forever. As we started to creep closer to graduation with teams, people started to say, you're taking our coach away, or you're removing this. And so we learned quickly that we needed to be really strategic about, even though we would graduate you, there would still be a strong support model available so that teams didn't feel like they were out in an island trying to sort out accessibility post-graduation. So what my team and I did was we tried to say, what are some of those components that we can make that are available for them, post graduation. And so we'd already established office hours, but we tried to reiterate that we will always be in this location at this time with a team of accessibility experts, that your questions will always be answered. We've got Mattermost channels, we've got Teams channels, we've got places where the expertise is in case you ever need us. We've got some conventions set up for Jira tagging, so that my team can keep track of other teams' progress, right? We've got eyes into their work through Jira. And then, of course, we've got a really strong automation program that allows us some sort of insights into how they're doing post-graduation, right? And so those are set up along the way. So even with the support model, even with the training, even with 12 to 18 months of an embedded expert on the team, the feedback that we got was, we're still concerned. And so that's where we sat down with DQ. That's where we sat down with members of my team. That's where we sat down with a couple of POs, and we said, what is the next level of support looking like? Because if we're graduating and walking away, we're creating discomfort, but we can't stay with them forever. And so it took me, a full 17 minutes to get to friendly neighborhood coaching, right? Which is the name of this topic. But again, got to understand where we came from to see where we're going. So the friendly neighborhood coach was born from that. We're ready to graduate. We've achieved a degree of maturity. We've hit our milestones. We're trained. We're doing it in the ceremonies. We're talking the talk. We're walking the walk, but we still need expertise. Okay. And so, we call it the friendly neighborhood coach, or the FNC for short, because we're trying to keep neighborhood right in there, right? They're not in your house every day like they were when they were on the team, but they're right there. And so FNC, we've had a lot of fun with this one, right? Brings up a lot of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood type references, but we're trying to keep the doors open. We're trying to keep the engagement open. We talked about the heart and soul of our program is this coaching. And so we needed to tweak things so that we could support those teams that didn't need as much support, but didn't want to be left out there. So again, this is friendly neighborhood coaching. This is neighborhood coaching. And the idea is simple, right? Support those graduated agile teams by ensuring that they have what they need to build and maintain an accessible product. And so what does that look like more tactically, right? I didn't mention it yet, but I'll say the ratio that we had worked out on our side was that for every one coach, we had 3 agile crews. So we knew that we needed to change that ratio for neighborhood coaching, right? That if you're doing less with the teams every day, from a coach's perspective, they could support more teams because those teams would require less. So we actually tried to work out neighborhoods, right? And so, just like any bank, we've got a group of people who work on online banking. So what we had tried to say was, can we have a neighborhood coach for those online banking teams that have graduated the program? Because that way the neighborhood coach is really familiar with all the nuances of online banking. And they're really familiar with all the ins and outs and the different design challenges and the different pieces that are specific to online banking. And could we have a neighborhood for account opening? Same idea, right? There's a neighborhood coach who has account opening, who understands the challenges of the account opening team, who understands some of the uniqueness of it, or just everything tied to account opening. And the same thing would go for PNC.com for our public space, right? If we set up these neighborhoods of teams that had graduated the program, but were still, you still had a subject matter expert who knew accessibility, but that also knew the space that you were working in. So we started to kind of iterate on that. Like, was there something there, and that's kind of where we are, is we're graduating teams. And what we found was, I'm going to my next slide here, the neighborhoods, based on some teams moving faster than others, some teams moving slower than others, a lot of different wrenches being thrown at these different teams. while we wanted it to be, okay, there's a neighborhood for online banking, there's a neighborhood for account opening, there's a neighborhood for PNC.com. In reality, we've got one neighborhood that encompasses crews from all of those different areas. So I guess we had some, again, early lessons learned. We thought we might establish neighborhoods just according to those types of experiences. But the way that it really shook out was that as teams graduated our program, we had a few online banking teams graduate, we had a few account opening teams graduate, and we've got some .com teams that are moving toward graduation. So how can we establish a neighborhood where they have the accessibility support they need, but they have different unique needs? And that's where we are. So we're tinkering with the model. We've had a lot of things come up over the last year that have required further tinkering of the model. I think we talked at length last year at AXCON about team churn. That is the Achilles heel. That is the Achilles heel of our coaching program, right? You can be the most mature accessibility team in the world, and if the Great Resignation comes up and people take different roles in the organization or take different roles outside of the organization, where does that leave us in terms of our ability to create an accessible product? And so we're working on that, and significant challenge for us. But again, didn't want to shy away from some of where we are and some of the realities of our situation. So I think I've already talked a little bit about the initial response, but that was the first thing, right? It all looked well and good until, for example, PNC bought a bank this year. So people's priorities shifted to support, the integration of a bank and the customers tied to that, right? So some of our initial response was positive until teams got diverted, right? So that's something that we're always going to have to deal with, and anybody at any big organization is going to have to deal with, because your priorities are always shifting, and with accessibility, you just have to take it with you. So that was some of the initial response. And we're still kind of in the midst of the initial response around neighborhood coaching. And so maybe I'll pause there, take a sip of water, and then we'll round it out and we'll get into questions here. Because I think we're still in the midst of a lot of unknowns for us. We're working through them. And I think we kind of wanted to leave it as to be continued, but let's talk with the folks at AXCON about what comes to mind here, and help you kind of see what would be helpful through our process. So I think, Emily, if we can, maybe we can open it up.
Yeah, we sure can. We've got some great questions, and folks, don't forget, if you have questions or if you'd like to upvote a question in the Slido, you can go to the audience Q&A, and we will be taking our questions from there. So the first question is, are the coaches externally hired, or can the people who were previously coached and whose accessibility knowledge has grown become coaches themselves?
Yes. So that's exactly what we anticipate is going to happen for us at PNC. We've identified, we're grappling with the terminology, right? But we'll call them champions for right now. Champions emerge just naturally, right? And so we've got a little working list on our side of champions that have emerged in the different roles, and absolutely will be hiring coaches internally this year and externally. But yeah, you're spot on. As you start working on this with people, people really get the chops, and really get passionate and excited about it. And so, yeah, we do intend that we'll be hiring some coaches this year who are today in other roles, but tomorrow we think will be folks for sure.
Yep. That's excellent. And yeah, it's a lot of the train the trainer kind of thing. Only teach the coaches how to be, folks how to be coaches, I think, is what can help make it more sustainable for you guys. And yeah. So another question that we have is how many teams are coaches assigned to? And I think you kind of covered this. I think you said
Yeah.
one coach per 3, but go ahead and.
Yeah. And that's a good one because that's how it is today, right? That is what we worked out. We think we talk about it a lot because in some situations it's spot on and it works beautifully. And in other situations, especially as teams gain maturity and they need less, we will have coaches say, I think I could take another team. Um, you know, then on the flip side, we'll have some coaches who will have 3 teams who say, I think I've got too much. So we don't have the magic recipe on that. I don't know if we'll ever have the magic recipe on it. So we say on average 3 to 1, but it is generally case by case. And now what's happening is because we've been at it for a couple of years, people who have learned how to do it, but maybe landed on another team. If you have a really mature developer land on a team that's never worked on accessibility, you can get people up to snuff quickly, so we've got good things happening as we get a lot of people trained and they kind of go their separate ways throughout the organization. And that affects the ratio, right? Because if a coach is starting off with a team that might already have some folks who know how to do this, the lift isn't as heavy. So that ratio is tough. We say average 3 to 1. But I would say average with a big asterisk next to it that I don't know if we'll ever have the magic recipe on that.
Yeah, I could see that being really, really difficult, especially because all teams are different and at a different point in their, development experience and design experience and all that. So, yep.
Yes. Yep.
So here's another question. So sometimes I feel like I'm giving the same feedback over and over again. And I think this is common with in the coaching role, I need to balance my accessibility work with my other work. How do we reduce the amount of time?
The amount of time spent with giving the same feedback over and over again?
I think so. Yep. That's my understanding of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's 2 ways that we try to do that. So I think when we talked about training and we talked about special topics training, that is one of the things. If we identify common pain points that different coaches are seeing in different teams, in some situations, we will spin up a special topics training, and our special topics trainings have been really well attended. So we'll say, okay, we've identified that many of you are running into this. Let's have a special topics on it. So that's one way where we will try to just bring everyone into the room. And I think it's if you build that they will come situation, right? Because again, those are really well attended trainings when you make them really specific to identified pain points. So that's one way we get out from under it. The other way is we do have an accessibility steering committee. So when coaches start to see the same thing over and over again, a lot of times we'll say, let's bring it to steering committee and let's document some guidance. And then let's make that guidance available across the board. And sometimes what it'll be is we need a decision on it, right? We need to decide the PNC approach on this, document it, and then make it available for people so that we don't end up saying the same thing over and over again. We write it down, we share it out, and it's there for the taking. So I think between special topics training and then identifying pain points and bringing them to our steering committee, we get out from under that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Kelly, because I've seen this successful at other organizations too, documenting, this is the way that we're going to handle this. We know there's multiple options for it, but this is the way we want to approach it at our organization. So that's great. Mm-hmm. How does the company handle the time and resource requirements to support other teams?
Yeah, I mean, it has been set up for us so that we are equipped to tackle this. And it sort of aligns with our company values. It aligns with our needs around diversity and inclusion. And so we're at a place at PNC where we have that support from the top on down. And I don't know if that's too generic to answer it, but I think that's probably as much as I can say on it, right? That the company's made a commitment. And so in making the commitment, they've given us some space to flush out these approaches.
That's hugely important too, right? So, making sure that executive leadership or upper leadership has bought in so that the development teams or the product teams have the time to be able to work with your coaches and that you guys have the coaches to dedicate to them. So, yep, it's a culture change and I can see that.
Yeah.
How do your agile coaches and accessibility coaches interact to support the teams without stepping on toes? Do you guys have agile coaches at PNC?
We don't anymore. So we did a couple years ago, especially when we were shifting to agile. There was a lot of agile coaches. I'm gonna just say that in my space, we don't currently have any agile coaches. I don't want to say that they don't exist anywhere in the company, but I've not seen a roster with an agile coach in a couple of years. I think just because we've gained a certain degree of maturity with agile, and so those coaches have either moved on in the company or there's been some decisions around maybe not needing them anymore. I can't say for sure, but I can say that there's no interaction with them because we don't have agile coaches assigned to our teams.
Okay, awesome. Next question is, what do you think about having an accessibility advocate per team, possibly a developer, remaining part of the team ongoing, like a designer?
Yeah, so that's a great thought. And I bet if we had a panel of DQ folks to talk about that, or even a panel of like different institutions to talk about that, because well, let me tell you why I'm saying that. So there is a school of thought that everyone should be a champion, that if you're gonna get this right, that everyone should understand that they have a role to play, and there shouldn't have to be one person in the team sort of beating the drum on it, that everyone should be beating the drum on it to a certain degree. And so that's great in a perfect world. But in a less than perfect world where people's priorities are shifting, you can see a situation where if you have that advocate or you have that champion assigned, they're ensuring that no one ever strays from it. And so, like I said, I bet we could do a whole session on that, because I know myself personally, we hear from people who have great, robust accessibility champion programs. And, from what I understand, some companies have actually gotten away from accessibility champion type programs because they're either expecting everyone to do it, or they got into situations where that developer who was the accessibility champion, everything just went to him. Every question, every thought, every story that had accessibility in it. And so again, maybe there's a good, fun debate to be had, because I know for us, we've heard of different things, and we just simply haven't had the bandwidth to take a good look at building a champion program. And I think we'd want to do that, but there's different schools of thought out there. Like I said, I bet we could have a fun panel on that, really. But that's kind of our perspective on it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it'd be interesting to see how champion programs or building champions has worked out for other orgs. So yeah, maybe we'll have something on XCon next year for that. So next question, are the coaches compensated or seconded to provide this support, or is it considered voluntary?
No. I mean, coaching is their full-time job. So, they're paid for it. And so we're not in any situation where someone is wearing another hat. The majority of our coaches, work for DQ, and that's, the statement of work that we have worked out with them. So yeah, they're compensated, not voluntary, full-time job. And yeah, it's treated like any other role in the agile, the software development life cycle. So yeah, not voluntary, definitely a, full-time, compensated position.
Awesome. And one question, which we know the answer to, but the title of the book that you mentioned was Dylan Barrel's Agile Accessibility Handbook, right?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, somebody put a link to it in the comments. So if you guys are in the ideas, you can go ahead and select that. So awesome. How are coaches and others assessing if the coaching is having an impact on accessibility of what's produced?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the proof's in the pudding, right? We've got experiences that go out into the wild. And so, we're able to, and in many situations, we have automation set up, right? So we can look at the results of that to get a quick pass to see. We're, I think the tooling helps with that, right? The tooling helps us to say, okay, they've done everything we think. What happens when we run a quick scan? What happens when we have automation set up and teams upload their results of their automation? What does that look like? So I think, we're in a fortunate position where we can quickly, and in some cases less quickly, get a feel for how that team is doing based on their output. And so I think that answers it, because again, we can look at what they're actually producing. If it's in production or even just in the testing environments, we're able to assess it in different ways in different situations.
Yeah, so the next question kind of piggybacks on that one. So it wants to talk a little bit about the automation programs that are used to see how they're doing after graduation.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think of how deep I can get on what we specifically do for that. Yeah, I think maybe that's sort of internal information about what we do with automation. So I'm gonna pass on that. And yeah, I'll pass for right now, just because again, sort of how we test and the tools that we use, I think would not be publicly shareable for the moment.
Okay. Someone wants to learn a little bit more about the milestones for teams. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the milestones are set up by role. And so if you're a product owner, like some of the milestones are really simple too. So like for a product owner, one of the milestones is that they have to have a one-on-one meeting with their coach, right? So like, that's really easy. And that's like some of the low hanging fruit, right? Is, have I had that one-on-one with the coach? Yeah. So milestone checked off the list, right? Roles-based training is a milestone. So if I'm a coach and I've got my milestones, when my product owners go into training, I can cross that milestone off the list. So those are some of the easy ones. Then as you get deeper into it, some of them become harder to reach, right? Am I producing or like for QAs, right? Or QEs for testers? Am I catching the majority of accessibility issues, right? We've got some, I guess, checks built into the milestones. Like, are we largely catching everything? So as you get deeper and deeper, the milestones also get deeper. So they start off, like I said, with like one-on-ones. Are we getting a story through the sprint? If I've got a story that's through the sprint, that's a milestone. They get more complicated as they go. And then we have some milestones that we call key graduation indicators, right? So if you've, as you're going through your milestones, and like I said, you get through training and you get through these one-on-ones, then there's some milestones that we say, when you've hit this milestone or this role has hit this milestone, that's a key graduation indicator. That tells us that they're well on their way. And so again, that gets into the place where, if designers are creating designs that have very few issues when they reach the coach, right? Then that's saying like the training's working, the coaching is working, because their actual output is needing less and less attention from us. And so again, those deeper, bigger milestones, we call them key graduation indicators. And again, that's telling us that they're on the path to independence.
Yeah, that's great, Kelly. And I think that's important too, that you guys recognize the difference between activity-based metrics and milestones versus, results-based. So, taking the training is one, that's, an activity, but then you guys see the results, and those, designers don't have as many issues. So that's really important to track both of those. And you guys do that really well.
Yeah, and that's an important conversation for us to help people understand that just because you've done the training, doesn't mean that you are a full-fledged pro on accessibility, right? The training is just one piece of the pie for us. So that's a conversation that we have a lot.
Yep. The next one is around ensuring that accessibility acceptance criteria make it into the new UI stories and bugs is logical. But what does the remediation process look like when leadership is focused on new?
Yeah, so we, just talked about that a little bit this morning, right? So we try to always start with new development. And so some of the ways that projects are coming together at PNC allow that to work for us. But of course, we have situations where we have to do remediation. And so let me think about what would be pertinent to share for that. There's a couple examples that we're like right in the midst of, where we sort of have to not do it ideally, because like I said, whenever possible, we'll always hone on a new development. So Emily, read me that question again, just so that I can make sure that I talk about what we do with remediation when we have no other options.
Sure. So it's really around, and let me see if I can pull it up again.
Because I think I know what they're saying, right? They're saying, okay, ideally you start with the design and then you work through all the way, but what do you do with remediation?
Yeah. It sounds like leadership is focused on let's make everything new, accessible, from now on. But that there's other stuff. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we'll do is we'll help as the backlog gets populated, right? Once we've established where all the problems lie, we'll try to bring the team along for how it gets into a backlog, right? So that, you're never going to get these stories worked unless they're properly written and in a backlog. So we have an opportunity there with the BSAs. And so that's one that I've seen happen. We're not going to necessarily populate the backlog for you. We're going to bring the BSA along to say, here's how we write the stories, and here's what you can learn about the issues that we've identified. Like some of it we treat it as a learning opportunity. So instead of the coach going in and just populating a backlog, again, the BSA is involved in populating the backlog because then that brings them into it from there. And it can be choppy, right? It can be a little bit clunkier than we would like. But I think some of it is instead of just us populating a backlog or a coach populating a backlog, you bring the team along and help them understand as each story goes in, what each story means. And then, apply some lessons learned, so if it's an issue that could have been caught at design, had we been involved at that point, then it's a teachable moment, right? So we're going to work through this issue, but here's what you need to know about not repeating that same mistake, or here's how we could get ahead of that in the past. And sort of treating the backlog that you will have for remediation as teachable moments.
Yeah, that's excellent. So talking about that design space that you were just kind of alluding to, so how well versed are the accessibility coaches in design thinking or human-centered design and the intersection between the two?
Yeah, I think it depends on the coach. So we have some coaches who have vast and deep development background, and they were developments in another development. They were developers in another life and have taken a keen interest in accessibility, and so sort of use those skills as coaches. So in that situation, when they have the strong development background, they might not have the strong design background. I can think of one coach specifically who we used to work with, who had the strong design background, who brought that to the table. And so it varies by the coach. And right now, that is a situation that we work with DQ on to try to make sure that we bring in like a well-versed, diverse group of coaches who have different levels of expertise in different areas. So like I said, so we do have some who have, that heavy developer experience. We've got a few who were designers who've come into the coaching realm. And so it kind of depends. It's a mixed bag based on their background and sort of their past experience before they got into the coaching scene.
Sure. Okay. And then what advantages and disadvantages does your model have over a central accessibility team who can act as a common touch point for all teams?
Yeah, so the advantages for us is that we're spreading the skills out. And so as you go off and work on the product you're on today, or maybe future products, you take those skills with you. Whereas if you're centralized and you just have the one accessibility team, how do you scale that? Or is it just always them? And so for us, we wanted to just equip people and teams broadly. Now, a disadvantage of that is, of course, what I talked about before, team churn, right? If you always have a team that is focused on accessibility, even if people leave, then you bring new people on. Whereas for us, we're less involved, especially as teams graduate, right? We're less involved with the different mechanics of the team. Whereas if you did have that centralized team, you'd always be keeping them staffed. If you were committed, if someone left, you'd bring someone else in, right? We'd always have eyes on that. But again, I think thinking the long game, for us, sending people forth with the skills is sort of the advantage as we see it. But man, there are pros and cons. Yeah.
For sure. Yep. And so also, how do you address the accessibility issues in out of the box components that are not controlled by your organization?
Yeah, I mean, so we have situations with vendors. It sounds like maybe that's where you're going, right? Where what can I say on this? So that happens a lot. Because of course, like most big organizations, we rely on vendors for different pieces of our experience, and the vendors, we have some systems in place through ETPM and through our contracts to try to get ahead of that. And we're strengthening that every month to try to make sure that if we're working with you, what you're providing us out of the box has been vetted to a certain degree for accessibility. So I think there's some proactive pieces that live before they ever get to us, right? That our organization and many organizations are making stronger every day. So that's a big one, right? And we partner where we can to help the oversight in those organizations understand why that's important to us. And then we have other situations where maybe they've been a vendor of ours for a long time, right? Where we've got, we can't necessarily catch them at the beginning because we've been working with them for years and years and years. And so that's just where we have to roll up our sleeves and sort of take it on a case by case basis with the business owners, with the accessibility team, with the appropriate parties to try to get things looked at from there. So I know it's a little bit of a generic response, but I think that's the most I can say, but certainly something we're actively dealing with.
No, I think that's excellent. And, working with your procurement team, I think ETPM for you guys is enterprise third-party risk management. Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. So working with your vendor risk management team and folks like that are going to help you kind of curb those issues going forward. So, well, guys, this has been great. We've had a lot of excellent Q&A. Kelly gave an excellent presentation. I just want to thank you so much, Kelly, for your time and for your insights and all the great information you provided. That is it for this particular session. I hope you guys have a great rest of your XCon and take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.